Welcome to this week's Money Metals podcast, helping gold and silver investors during these treacherous times. Now, here's this week's market wrap with commentary and analysis from the company voted 2015's Precious Metals Dealer of the Year in the U.S., Money Metals Exchange.
Welcome to this week's Market Wrap podcast. I'm Mike Leeson. Coming up, we'll hear a wonderful interview with Guy Christopher, one of our most popular columnists at moneymetals.com. Guy enlightens us as only he can on a couple of well-known but very misunderstood stories, Robin Hood and the Wizard of Oz, and explains how both underwent changes and ultimately developed either a socialistic or an anti-sound money narrative. You will not want to miss a fascinating interview with Guy Christopher coming up after this week's market update. Well, it's been a big week for the precious metals markets, with gold and silver prices surging following the Federal Reserve's rate decision. As expected, the Fed left its benchmark interest rate unchanged. Fed Chair Janet Yellen touted progress in the economy. She expressed confidence that more progress would allow the Fed to hike before the end of the year, just not before the election. Of course, there's plenty of suspicion swirling that the Fed's policy timing is politically motivated. Yellen herself issued a pointed denial following Wednesday's policy announcement. Doth protest too much?
The Fed's next meeting comes just 1 week before the November elections, with the Fed chair dismissing statements from Republican presidential nominee Donald Trump that policymakers are playing politics with interest rate decisions.
I can say emphatically that partisan politics plays no role in our decisions about the appropriate stance of monetary policy.
If Fed officials were in the bag for Hillary, they surely wouldn't come out and admit it, so their denials don't prove that their decisions are free from political bias. At the same time, it would be difficult to prove that they are intentionally trying to help Hillary Clinton win the election. Fed officials are very careful with what language they let slip out to the public. The Fed operates behind an institutional veil of secrecy, and so far, Fed officials and their allies in Congress have successfully resisted a public audit of the Federal Reserve. But the fight to audit the Fed continues. Representative Thomas Massie is helping lead the push in Congress. He pushed the latest revision of the Federal Reserve Transparency Act through committee this summer. The bill is now eligible for a full House vote. The last time that happened, Audit the Fed passed by an overwhelming 333 votes to 92. But in the Senate, key Democrats have blocked the bill. With party control of the Senate up for grabs this fall, monetary reformers hold out hope that the next Senate will be more favorable to auditing the Fed. Republicans aren't likely to do any better than keep their current tally of 54 Senate seats. With the way the competitive races are lining up now, top political forecasters expect Democrats to pick up at least a couple of seats. Perhaps, though, some incoming Democrats will be more open to making a deal on auditing the Fed. Senate Minority Leader Harry Reid is retiring, offering at least some room for hope that things will be different in the next Senate. In the meantime, it's business as usual in Washington and on Wall Street. The stock markets responded positively to the Fed's latest non-hike, as did the bond market and the precious metals markets. For the week, gold is up $19 or 2.2% to bring spot prices to $1,340 an ounce. Gold is glittering as we head officially into fall, but silver is shining even brighter. Silver prices advance strongly this week through Thursday's close to touch the $20 level. As of this Friday morning recording, silver trades at $19.84 per ounce, up a full dollar on the week, and good for a 5.3% gain since last Friday's close. Turning to the platinum group metals, platinum prices trade at $1,057, up 3.6% this week. Platinum has traded at a discount to gold for the past 2.5 years and continues to represent a value opportunity within the precious metals space, arguably more so now than palladium. Palladium currently checks in at $707 an ounce and is registering a 4.7% weekly gain. The positive post-Fed price action in all the precious metals is an encouraging sign for bulls who are looking for a big fall rally. America's avowed non-political central bankers seem content to elevate all asset markets, at least until after the election. At some point, there will be a letdown and possibly a hard landing in the stock market. And at some point, gold and silver will decouple from stocks, bonds, and other financial assets. But for now, everything is floating on a rising tide of Fed liquidity. Odds favor a higher stock market and higher precious metals prices in the weeks ahead. Well, now, without further delay, let's get right to this week's exclusive interview. It is my privilege now to welcome Guy Christopher, one of the featured columnists on our moneymetals.com website. Guy is an investigative journalist and published author, but he's also a former stockbroker and veteran of the 101st Airborne serving in the Vietnam War. All of this real-world experience, combined with his communication skills, has helped him provide our readers and customers with some really great insights. We have thousands reading and commenting on his writings each time we publish one of his pithy articles. Guy, welcome back. It's always great to talk to you, and it's been a while. How are you?
Well, thank you, Mike. It's a pleasure to be with you and an honor to be invited on your program.
Well, I'm excited to have you on today because it allows us to ask you about some of the great articles you've penned for us over these last few months. Now, first off, in your piece titled "The Colors of Money," you wrote about how Andrew Jackson, a strong advocate against central banking, is going to be replaced on the $20 bill here soon, something he probably never wanted to be on to begin with based on his ideas about paper money, but it's a slap in the face nonetheless. So as we start out here, give us a little bit of background and history on the man they called Old Hickory. Talk about his insistence on waging a fight against the idea of central banking, something he even called subversive to liberty.
Sure. Andrew Jackson, president, 1829-1836, was a foe of central banking. He believed in sound money. A lot of folks don't know that Andrew Jackson actually forced buyers and customers of the federal government to use gold and silver rather than paper money. He did that by executive order, and it caused a lot of concern among bankers because they had to come up with gold instead of paper. He was a foe of central banks for the same reason that people today are against central banks. He saw the dangers of printing money that was not backed by sound money, by gold and silver, and it was the subject matter of the early 1830s when he was president, and he finally got rid of what was known as the Second Central Bank of the U.S. He got rid of it in 1836 when its charter expired, ran from 1816 to 1836, and Jackson was absolutely instrumental in getting rid of the central bank. And of course, we went for 70 or 80 years up until 1913 before the U.S. had another central bank. So his legacy there was several decades of central bank-free commerce in the United States, and it was a financially and economically, except for the 5 years of the Civil War, it was a pretty good economic system for the country. I think Andrew Jackson was probably correct in fighting the central banks, but he was certainly known as the bank buster back in his day.
Expanding on the point here, you talked about the formation of the Federal Reserve, and you described the purpose of it in your Color of Money article. Now I'll quote you here and then get your comments. You wrote, "Old Hickory's 1836 victory held steady until 1913 when the bankers gathered in secret at Jekyll Island, Georgia, to plot the greatest bank robbery in history. The scheme was simple. First, print all the money they wanted, backed only by government promises. Then, day by day, steal all the wealth it represented through built-in, unstoppable inflation. As more and more Federal Reserve debt coupons would litter the landscape, their value would shrivel to less and less. Since government always has first use of cash hot off the presses, only unsuspecting tax-paying citizens would ever be financially harmed. It worked like a charm. Since the Fed was created, the dollar has lost about 98% in the 100 years since, Guy, and we've had nothing but a constant cycle of booms and busts. But it wasn't always that way, as you alluded to a moment ago. Please talk about the U.S. economy both before and after the Fed.
Well, I could illustrate it with one example, Mike. George Washington and Thomas Jefferson paid just about the same in cost for a good horse, for a good shotgun, for a tankard of ale at the inn, as Teddy Roosevelt paid in 1906. So 120 years, inflation was not a word that was in the American lexicon. Yes, there was such a thing as inflation, but nobody talked about it because prices weren't going up. Prices were pretty steady for about 100 years or more, and the only real inflation problem that the country suffered was during the war between the states, 1861 to 65, when costs got out of hand for the U.S. government. Of course, the Confederacy was destroyed, and every paper dollar the Confederacy printed went to zero, except for the ones today that are so rare that they are actually collector's items. But from an everyday common man standpoint, the Confederate money was worthless. Confederates minted very few silver coins. I'm not aware of any gold coins that ever circulated by the Confederacy, but still in all, for most of the 1800s, prices remain the same. Graphs show that, history shows that, and that was largely because gold and silver had back any paper money that the government printed, and it worked for quite a long time until, of course, 1913, when the Federal Reserve was created in secret by bankers to protect their ability to print money. So Federal Reserve and the Central Bank of the United States was really a new idea in 1913. Most people had no idea what it meant. They thought, hey, the government's doing it, let's go along with it. And of course, what we have today is constant, everyday, moment-by-moment inflation. It's a myth that the government has never defaulted on its debts. I hear quite often that America has a perfect credit record, it has never defaulted, but that's just not true. Starting with the Continental Dollar, the first paper money printed by the Continental Congress in the 1780s, the Continental Dollar crashed, giving us the phrase, not worth a continental. Well, that's where the phrase came from, because there were millions, literally millions of Continental dollars out there, and the public wouldn't use them because the public found them worthless. The government defaulted on its gold obligations in 1933, wiping out gold bonds, gold obligations. The government defaulted again on gold in 1971 when Nixon, quote, closed the gold window, unquote. So the government has defaulted on its obligations several times in its history, and the greatest default has been ongoing, planned, deliberate inflation. And if folks don't understand inflation, it just boils down to the more that money's printed, the more money that floats around out there, the less it's worth. Usually sooner than later, but now it depends on the times and the politics. But that money suddenly becomes worth less than it was yesterday. And so you've got higher prices, which creep up by pennies a week or pennies a day, and people really don't notice. But in that respect, the United States government has defaulted on lots and lots and lots of obligations. So it's not unusual to think that the United States might one day again default on its obligations.
Obviously, with Fed policy, we have a lot of booms and busts that are created. They just basically prop up different asset bubbles. We're seeing that in spades here today. And while we're on the topic of the Fed, we've just seen officials there punt once again on hiking rates. They've painted themselves into a corner. It's easy to print money and lower rates, but it's also very hard to stop. Do you think they can pull themselves out of that jam that they're in and normalize interest rates, or might they stay the course at zero or even go to negative rates at some point in the future until pensions collapse or the bubbles that they've been blowing up in bonds, equities, and real estate finally pop, bringing about a crisis even bigger than 2008? What are your thoughts there, Guy?
My thoughts are not optimistic. I don't believe the Fed is going to raise rates for a long time, and when they do, a quarter point is really meaningless. A quarter point doesn't mean a lot. You've had other guests on your program say the same thing, and I tend to agree with them. A quarter point is not such a big deal, but when you look at the big picture, the interest rate should tell you what your money is worth, what the savings you have is worth, what the money that the government is printing is worth. If interest rates were around 5%, historically that's where they've been for a long time. If you had interest rates that were normal, then that would mean that your money is pretty stable and that your money is worth anything. But when the government itself, when the Federal Reserve, the Treasury, when they themselves tell you that the interest rate should be zero or even negative interest rates, known as NERP, and that's something they're talking about. We've seen it overseas in Europe, and we're hearing about more and more of that here in the United States. When they tell you that interest rates are zero, they're telling you the dollar's worthless, that the dollar has no value, that the dollar is just a piece of paper with zero value or with negative value. If you sit and look at that and say, my government is telling me that the money that's floating around in circulation is worthless, why should we trust this money? Why should we pay attention to what the government is saying about this money? We should be worried about that. Most people don't think about it because inflation was planned in the first place to be so minute, day by day, year by year, that we would not notice it. And that is why I wrote It Worked Like a Charm. We haven't noticed it. For the most part, Americans don't really understand inflation. They think that prices are supposed to go up, but that's just not the case in a healthy economy.
Certainly, it gets back to the idea of Keynesianism versus Austrian economics. You've got savers being punished with zero interest rates, and a lot of speculators are out there trying to chase yield, and that's what money does. It tries to chase yield and builds up these asset bubbles, and the whole thing is just based on debt, and that's not really how it's supposed to work. Now moving on, I want to chat about your latest piece titled Fiction, Fairy Tales, and Fiat. You highlight how, sadly, so few Americans these days have any clue about the sound money ideas that we're talking about right now and why it's so important. And I'm especially talking about the millennials or that age block and the 18 to 24 demographic. There almost seems to be a turn toward the ideals of government-run socialism, as you discuss in this piece. You make the case that the very thought of taking from the rich and giving to the poor is ingrained in the younger generation from an early age, thanks to the story of Robin Hood. But the original story is actually totally misunderstood by most. Talk about this.
The story of Robin Hood started 600 years ago. It was folklore, passed on by balladeers, passed on father to son, so to speak, and basically it was an anti-government storyline. It was a storyline that said the government is stealing everything we've got, and here is our champion, this fellow named Robin Hood, who is out there trying to take that wealth back from the government and redistribute it actually to the people it was stolen from in the first place. Well, that storyline wasn't very popular, especially after Franklin Roosevelt grabbed everybody's gold in 1933. That storyline has changed to what we have today, which is Robin Hood robbed from the rich to give to the poor. I just read a piece, I love the guy's writing, David Stockman, who was one of Reagan's budget guys. Stockman wrote a piece in which he referenced Robin Hood as a fellow who robbed the rich to give to the poor. It is ingrained thought that that's what Robin Hood was doing, but the fact of the matter is Robin Hood, he was hijacking the IRS on the roads of Sherwood Forest trying to get tax money back that had been stolen away from the common folk. Educators and government weren't really happy with that particular storyline, of course, so it became one of robbing the rich to give to the poor, which is basically where we are today with socialism. Redistribution of wealth, taking it from those who earn it and those who work for it and giving it to those who did not earn it or did not work for it in the form of government subsidies. We've known this could happen since 1805 when Alexis de Tocqueville wrote in Democracy in America that the American system would work just fine until the people discovered that they could vote themselves money from the common treasury. And I think that he was right. It has worked just fine until we've gotten around to this share the wealth attitude. And that's something I believe, by the way, that Andrew Jackson was well aware of. He and de Tocqueville lived in the same time frame, and I am sure that Andrew Jackson was aware of de Tocqueville's writings and may very well have been influenced by them. So Robin Hood is well entrenched as a socialist, and when you tell these stories to children in grade school and they get it stuck in their heads that hey, it's okay to rob the rich to give to the poor, then what do you expect when Bernie Sanders runs for president? You're going to have a heck of a following right behind him, because they were taught from the age of 4 or 5 that socialism is a good thing, even though they may not have known what to call it.
Now, later on in that piece, you write about another well-known story, that of the Wizard of Oz. It was actually author L. Frank Baum's commentary on the battle between the proponents of the gold standard and the silver standard, but yet key parts of the original story were adapted and changed for the major motion picture that was made shortly after FDR coincidentally confiscated gold from the American public. Give us some background on that, the Wizard of Oz.
The entire episode was known as bimetallism. Silver interests wanted more silver in circulation, and that happened to coincide with the American public, which needed more silver in circulation. There was a legitimate argument against it, in that more silver in circulation might have meant inflation, it might have meant higher prices, it might have meant loss of control of the economy, and so it was a legitimate discussion. The author of The Wizard of Oz was on the Silverites side. They were called Silverites. And he felt that the common man was getting gypped because they didn't have enough silver in circulation. And when he wrote his classic, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, it was, in effect, about the fight between the gold and the silver interests. The silver interests actually wanted both a gold and a silver standard. The opposition wanted to just leave the standard at gold. The story has a young woman being torn from her home by the forces of nature. She's thrust onto this adventure where she meets wonderful people, and she meets a lot of bad actors along the way, the same type of experiences all of us have during life. And the big change in that story was that she was wearing silver slippers, and that she did not understand in her journey that the power of silver in her slippers was all she needed to find her way home. And finding her way home was really the only thing she wanted in the first place, was to get back to where she was when the tornado ripped her out of her Kansas house. She doesn't understand that. She learns it later, but silver was dropped from the script. The silver became rubies. There's no mention of the yellow brick road being a road of gold. And the reason for dropping silver, of course, was to get silver and gold off the mind of the American public. This movie was made in 1939, just a few years after FDR made his 1933 gold grab. There was no appetite whatsoever for bringing up again the argument that sound money is better than paper money. Nobody wanted to hear that. Hollywood played along with government, and so we ended up with The Wizard of Oz, Dorothy in ruby slippers, no mention of silver, and a movie that everybody loved, I think primarily because of the graphics. The travels that the girl made during her adventure were well animated, and I think that had a lot to do with that picture's success. But it certainly didn't have anything to do with the honesty that Baum had tried to put into the parable that he wrote about bimetallism.
I've heard other comparisons there about how the Wicked Witch of the East represented the evil bankers, and of course, obviously the Yellow Brick Road represented the gold standard and so forth. Yeah, fascinating stuff. Revisionist history is always very interesting, and we do have this move towards socialism and globalism, and obviously it's very concerning, but there is some reason for hope. Brexit and the growing discontent elsewhere in Europe seems to be signaling that many people have had enough of the march toward collectivism and globalism. We'll see if this current unrest is temporary or if it represents the beginning of the end of the EU. Do you see any of the current anti-globalist sentiment that is driving support for outsiders like Donald Trump here in the U.S. having any lasting impact?
Oh, I think it's going to have a great impact. We're seeing it all over the world. We are seeing it big time here in this country. I think Trump's support is underreported. That's a personal opinion. I read an article a few days ago that Donald Trump has broken all records for small donor donations, and I'm reading every day that he's gaining traction with minorities, black minorities, Hispanic minorities. I think that a lot of folks who have given up on politics over the past 10, 20, 30, 40 years are waking up and saying, I think I'll take a chance on this guy. Why? Do they love the fella? Not necessarily, but he represents something that they think they've lost. I believe his support is looking at him as a fellow who might restore some of the things that have been lost in this country. I don't think they're necessarily in love with Trump. I think they are in love with a lot of the things he has to say. Those things have been repeated around the world. Brexit was a wake-up call for that. Many other countries are talking about breaking away from centralized authority. Germany, heck, Angela Merkel has just lost 2 major votes in Germany. The last was Sunday, just a few days ago. She has now turned around and said, well, maybe I will rethink bringing in 1 million refugees to Germany. That is a big signal that nationalism is playing a big role right now rather than the global outlook. And I think that has come to this country. I think Trump hit a nerve that no one really wanted to talk about. Had Trump not been in this race, immigration would not be on the discussion agenda, I believe. A lot of other things wouldn't be on the agenda, but I think that Trump has hit a nerve that is actually a worldwide nerve. Around the globe, Italy, France, Poland, Switzerland, Sweden, they are all saying we are losing our identities. We don't like that. We want our identities back. And they are all, in some form or fashion, following the things that Brexit and now Trump are heralding.
Yeah, interesting times we live in here, and there's a lot going on. We'll see how this winds up with the whole battle between globalism and nationalism. It's going to be very interesting to see.
It's just a few weeks away for the United States. It's going to be a tense time, I think, for me and for others, and I'm sure everybody on both sides of that fence is going to be very anxious about November 8th.
Couldn't agree more. Well, very well put. Great stuff, as always. Thanks for your excellent insights once again. We always enjoy your writings, and I look forward to reading more, as well as having you on from time to time to discuss those articles with our audience here. So keep up the good work. Take care, and we'll talk to you again very soon. Hope you have a very good weekend, my friend.
Mike, thank you. I've always congratulated Money Metals Exchange for the educational efforts. I would repeat that again today. I think you guys do a great job trying to educate folks as to just what finance, money, economics, sound money are all about.
Well, thanks a lot. You're certainly a big part of that, and we're glad to have you a part of our team. Well, that will do it for this week. Thanks again to Guy Christopher, MoneyMetals.com columnist. To check out any of his fabulous work, just go to MoneyMetals.com and type in Guy Christopher into the search bar for links to all of his great articles. And check back here next Friday for our next weekly Market Wrap podcast. Until then, this has been Mike Leeson with Money Metals Exchange. Thanks for listening, and have a great weekend, everybody.
Thank you for joining us for this week's Money Metals podcast. Be sure to come back next week. And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast through iTunes for answers to all of your questions, or to discreetly and securely buy or sell gold or silver coins, bars, and rounds. Call 1-800-800-1865 or visit www.moneymetals.com. Our knowledgeable and no-pressure specialists are standing by between 7 a.m. and 5:30 p.m. Mountain Time, Monday through Friday. Or you can lock in your order online, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Again, visit us at www.moneymetals.com or call 1-800-800-1865.